Joining us today is John Schmitt. He's a senior economist from the Center of Economic Policy and Research based in Washington. He has written extensively for both popular and academic audiences on economic inequality and labor market issues. How are you today, John?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Great. So today I would just like to talk a little bit about the upcoming midterm elections, especially as it relates to income inequality. Several recent surveys indicate that income inequality is a key theme among voters as they head to the polls on Tuesday. So it seems like the Democrats have sort of picked up on this and used it throughout their electoral campaign. I guess for our audience, I was wondering if you could just briefly explain to our viewers why the issue of income inequality has become such an important topic, particularly for working class voters in the United States.
Well, I think that's a very big question. Let me just try and break it into a couple of parts. I mean, I think there's the underlying reason why it's become such a big issue, which is 35 or 40 years of very low growth in wages. And in fact, for many workers in the United States, wages are actually lower today than they were at the end of the 1970s. That's particularly shocking because we're a much richer country than we were at the end of the 1970s. It goes straight to the issue of economic inequality, that we've had growth, but it's been heavily concentrated at the top, and actually some of it has even come out of the wages of workers at the bottom. So that's that kind of long-term issue. And I think more immediately what's happening is we see the kind of political awakening that kind of captured by the Occupy Wall Street movement just a few years ago, which I think really put this topic on the political agenda. You know, Occupy Wall Street, I think, has not maintained its level of prominence in terms of that organization or those group of people, but the legacy of the organization and of the occupations around the country and around the world has really gotten into the political discussion in the United States. It's been helped along by the recent publication, for example, of The Capital in the 21st Century, the book by Thomas Piketty, the French economist, which, it's shocking that a book by a French economist that is, 800 pages long or something along those lines can actually get into the political imagination. And I think it's because precisely that groundwork of Occupy fast food workers who've been organizing to have a $15 per hour wage for their profession, for their work. A lot of state and local government movements to try and increase the minimum wage. All of those things I think are coming together, and there's going to be a focus on election day around that.
Yeah, recently, throughout the year, it seems like a lot of high-ranking Democrats have been addressing the issue of income inequality. But are you aware of any concrete proposals that are coming out of Washington to really sort of reverse the growing income inequality?
Well, I would certainly wish that there could be more than what we're talking about right now, but I want to be as optimistic as I can. The fact that we are finally relative quiet on this particular issue, we are seeing direct interest in trying to engage these questions. The most, the most immediate and concrete proposal on the table right now is a proposal in the Congress to raise the minimum wage at the federal level to $10.10 an hour. It's currently $7.25 an hour, where it has been since 2009. So it hasn't increased at all in now over 5 years. So that proposal, I think, has some possibilities of passing over the next few years. Clearly, the Republicans are not big supporters of it, but we also know that previous increases in the federal minimum wage have happened even when we've had Republican presidents, even when we've had Republicans controlling the House and the Senate. And generally, it's because it's such a popular issue, I think even Republicans can feel forced at certain points to vote in favor of it. The Democratic proposals are pretty well supported in both the House and the Senate, so I feel like it's mostly a question of when the things come together in such a way that the Republicans will finally cave on it and pass it. And that's likely to happen sometime in the next few years. There's also a lot of action at the state and local level. It'd be too much to go into all of the various proposals on the table, but there are a lot of states that are considering increases, or cities that are considering increases, and a lot of those have been successful so far. Here in the District of Columbia, where I live, the city council, for example, recently passed a resolution to substantially increase the minimum wage here, and that's typical of a lot of cities and a fair number of states around the country.
So how can you just explain really as briefly as you can, how do wages, or how would increasing the minimum wage reverse the economic inequality trends?
Well, I think I wouldn't want to make too much of it. I think it would be very helpful to increase the minimum wage because it would help to increase the bargaining power, essentially, of workers at the bottom. The big problem we've had over the last 30 or 40 years is the decline in bargaining power for workers at the middle and at the bottom. And there have been many causes of that, including the long-term decline in the inflation-adjusted value of the minimum wage. I think the minimum wage is one important step, and it's very concrete. It's something that's actually on the table that we could talk about right now. So I think it's worth talking about.
And really quickly, you briefly mentioned the decline in bargaining power of the middle class, and it kind of ties into another question that I wanted to just briefly address, which is economic mobility in the United States seems to be something that's also on the minds of voters as they head to the polls on Tuesday. And there was a recent poll by I believe it was Gallup that found that more and more U.S. citizens are feeling that they have less and less opportunities to improve their economic status. And I guess I just was wondering if you could just briefly sort of comment on that and talk a little bit about why that's happened.
Well, we have a vision here in the United States of the way our country is organized that is founded on the belief that we might have a lot of inequality here, but you can always, if you work hard, get ahead and get to the top. And I think we're increasingly realizing that that's not true. And there's a lot of research, a lot of evidence that suggests that the United States is actually less mobile than a lot of countries of similar level of economic development, particularly a lot of European countries. And I think a key reason for that is we have so much inequality that it's actually hard to go from the bottom to the next rung up to the next rung up because the rungs are quite far apart. And I think that is one of the things that's getting some focus in the elections right now.
Yeah, and especially this it seems to be true for the African American demographic as well. I mean, I've read somewhere that it's like 60% more if you're born into African American family, you're 60. If you're born into the lower 2/5 of the income percentile, that you're 60% likely to stay in that income bracket rather than compared to that of a white person that's born into the lower 2/5. So it seems like it's even more pronounced amongst minorities in the United States.
I think that is a reflection of just how stratified our society is along a number of dimensions: race, gender, national origin, immigration status. So any groups that are kind of on the outs in terms of the economy are suffering that much more in the recession, and they have that many more problems in terms of long-term upward mobility.
Great. Well, I guess I'm just gonna have one more question for you, which is, I mean, how important are what will the implications of um, the midterm elections have on working class voters, if any?
Well, it's taken us basically yeah, it's taken us 4 decades to get to the level of inequality that we've achieved. The previous 5 decades, inequality was actually slowly or rapidly, and depending on the years, declining. But for 3, 4 decades since the end of the 1970s, we've seen this increase in economic inequality. So it's taken us a long time to get where we are, and I think it's going to take more than one election to turn things around. And I'm not even sure is a public debate happening now. There are some proposals on the table that would at least slow down the increase in inequality the last several decades.
Great. Well, we really appreciate you joining us and yeah, taking time out of your schedule to sort of talk about some of these issues. So, really appreciate your time.
Okay.